Captain Elias Vega stood on the observation deck of the Odyssey, staring out into the endless sea of stars. His eyes were narrowed, trying to make sense of the anomaly that had just appeared on the ship's radar, a strange black shape orbiting a dying star. The Odyssey was an exploration vessel, built for unknown missions, but this felt different. The shape was too familiar, and the timing of its appearance felt far too coincidental. "Captain, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Nora Hayes, the ship's chief navigator, her voice strained. She stood at the sensor panel, a puzzled expression on her face. Vega walked over, his boots echoing softly on the metal floor. He peered at the screen as Hayes adjusted the settings, zooming in on the object in space. The black shape was unmistakable. It was the Erebus, a ship that had vanished years ago without a trace. No one knew what happened to it, but its sudden reappearance was a mystery no one could ignore. "The Erebus?" Vega asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "It's been gone for decades." "Yes, sir," Hayes confirmed, tapping a few more keys. "It's the same ship. The Erebus disappeared during its last mission. It was rumored to be lost to the void. Until now. The Odyssey was hundreds of light years from the last known coordinates of the Erebus." Vega's heart raced. The Erebus had been a military vessel, renowned for its secrecy. Only a handful of people knew what had really happened on that ship, and now, here it was in front of them, as though it had never left. The ship's communication officer, Lieutenant Jason Cole, spoke from across the room. "Captain, there's a signal coming from the Erebus. It's faint, but it's definitely there." Vega turned toward him, his mind racing. "What's it saying?" "It's encrypted," Cole replied. "But the pattern is odd. It looks like coordinates, but they're shifting, moving. It's almost as if the ship is trying to leave us somewhere." Vega's pulse quickened. There was something wrong about this. If the Erebus was transmitting, then it had to have a reason. But what reason could it have for calling them? Was it a trap, or had something far more sinister happened to the crew of the Erebus? "Get the coordinates and plot a course," Vega ordered, his voice steady but sharp. "We're going to investigate." Hayes hesitated for a moment before responding. "Captain, are you sure? We don't know what we're walking into. It could be dangerous." Vega nodded slowly. "I know, but we don't leave things like this unanswered. We have to know what happened to the Erebus." The crew of the Odyssey had been trained for the unknown, for the dangers of space, but nothing had prepared them for the possibility that they might find a ghost ship in orbit around a dying star. Yet there was no turning back now. The mystery of the Erebus was too large to ignore, too important to leave unsolved. As the course was set, Vega walked to the ship's main command center, where the rest of the crew waited. The air was tense, filled with anticipation. Everyone knew that this mission could change everything. But what that change would be, no one could say. "I need all of you on your toes," Vega addressed them, his voice calm but firm. "This is no ordinary mission. The Erebus holds secrets, and we need to find them." Dr. Marilyn, the ship's sinologist, adjusted her glasses and spoke up. "Captain, we know that the Erebus was investigating an ancient alien artifact when it disappeared. If it's somehow connected to that, we might be dealing with something far worse than we can imagine." Vega nodded. He had heard the rumors. The Erebus had been tasked with retrieving an alien artifact, but the mission had gone silent before anyone could learn the truth about it. What if that artifact was still aboard the ship? And what if it had something to do with the Erebus's strange reappearance? "That's why we're going to proceed carefully," Vega replied. "I want everyone prepared for anything. We're not just dealing with a missing ship. We might be dealing with a force beyond our understanding." As the Odyssey approached the Erebus, Vega couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far darker than anyone could have imagined. The black ship in front of them was a ghost of the past, a reminder of a mission lost to time. But now, it was alive again, pulling them closer with its haunting signal. What secrets would they uncover on that ship? And were they ready to face whatever horrors the Erebus had become? The answers, Vega knew, were out there, and they were closer than ever. The Odyssey was now just a few hundred kilometers from the Erebus. The black ship, once a symbol of military might and mystery, hung in space like a shadow. Its dark, angular silhouette was almost unsettling, as if it was watching them, waiting. Captain Elias Vega stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back. He stared out at the ghostly ship through the large viewport. "Prepare to board," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of tension that even his experienced crew could feel. Lieutenant Nora Hayes, standing at the navigation console, worked quickly to calculate the approach. "We're in range, Captain. We can dock with the Erebus in 5 minutes." Vega nodded, then turned to Dr. Marilyn, the ship's sinologist. "You've studied the Erebus's mission. What do you think we're walking into?" Dr. Lynn adjusted her glasses, her eyes narrowed with concern. "I've gone over the records. The Erebus was on a top-secret mission to retrieve an ancient alien artifact. The ship went silent after reporting strange energy readings from a nearby system. The artifact was said to have powers that could alter the fabric of space and time. If it's still aboard—" She paused, the implication heavy in the air. "We may be dealing with forces we don't fully understand." Vega exhaled slowly. The thought of an ancient alien artifact with unknown powers was enough to make anyone uneasy, especially with the Erebus's strange return. But there was no turning back now. The crew had already made their choice. They would find out what happened to the Erebus, no matter the cost. The crew gathered in the docking bay, gearing up in their spacesuits. They were quiet, focused. Everyone knew the risks. It was not just a mission of exploration now. It had become a search for answers. And those answers could be far darker than any of them were prepared for. "Remember," Captain Vega said as he scanned the faces of his crew, "we stick together. No one goes off alone. Stay in constant communication." With that, they boarded the shuttle, and the engines hummed to life, pulling them toward the Erebus. The vast emptiness of space surrounded them as they glided toward the dark ship. Vega watched the approaching vessel on the view screen. It looked like something out of a nightmare, its hull pitted and scarred, as if it had been through 1,000 battles. The shuttle docked with the Erebus with a soft thud. The air inside the shuttle felt heavier as the crew prepared to disembark. Hayes was the first to open the hatch, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air inside the Erebus was stale, and the silence was overwhelming. There was no hum of engines, no buzz of machinery, just the oppressive quiet of a ship that had been abandoned for far too long. Vega stepped forward, his boots echoing on the metal floor. "Stay alert," he reminded the team. "We don't know what we'll find here." They moved down the dimly lit corridors of the ship, their footsteps muffled by the soft, rustling sounds of the ship itself. The walls were marked with scorch marks and strange symbols that none of the crew could recognize. They passed abandoned crew quarters, their doors ajar, revealing empty rooms that felt oddly frozen in time. It was as if the Erebus's crew had vanished in the middle of their tasks. Dr. Lynn examined one of the rooms, her flashlight illuminating dusty data pads scattered across the floor. She knelt down to pick one up. "These are logs from the crew," she murmured, but when she tried to read one, the screen flickered and died. "The data's corrupted." "Anything unusual?" Vega asked, his voice low as he scanned their surroundings. Dr. Lynn's face was pale as she stood up. "The logs show nothing but these symbols." She pointed to the walls. "They're alien." This ship wasn't just exploring alien ruins, it was dealing with something far older and darker. "Maybe the crew found something they weren't supposed to," Hayes suggested, her voice tense. "We need to move to the central chamber," Vega ordered. "If the artifact is still here, that's where it'll be." The crew pressed on, passing more empty rooms and strange markings. The ship seemed abandoned, yet there was an unease that lingered in the air, like they were being watched. The further they ventured, the more they began to feel it. the feeling of eyes upon them, unseen but always there. It was almost as if the ship itself had a presence, a will of its own. Finally, they reached the central chamber. The door opened with a low, grinding sound, revealing a massive room with a raised platform in the center. On that platform lay the artifact, glowing faintly with a pale blue light. It was a small, angular object, unlike anything the crew had ever seen. It radiated an energy that was almost tangible, vibrating in the air. Vega stepped forward, his breath catching in his throat. "This is it," he said quietly. "This is what the Erebus came for." Dr. Lin approached the artifact slowly, her hands trembling slightly. This is not just a piece of alien technology," she said softly. "This is something more, something dangerous." As she reached out to touch it, a flash of light filled the room, and the entire ship seemed to tremble. The crew staggered back, caught off guard by the sudden surge of energy. The lights flickered, and a distant, eerie sound echoed through the ship, like whispers carried on the wind. Something in the Erebus was waking up. The artifact glowed brightly, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. The room seemed to shudder as the energy from the object surged through the ship's metal walls. Captain Elias Vega could feel the pressure building in the air, a strange mix of excitement and dread. Something was changing in the Erebus, and they were at the center of it. "Everyone, stay back," Vega commanded, his voice cutting through the tension. His mind raced, trying to piece together what they were dealing with. He knew that the artifact on the platform wasn't just a tool. It was alive, in some way. It was connected to something much larger than any of them could comprehend. Dr. Mara Lin took a step back, her eyes wide with awe and fear. It's resonating with the ship," she murmured. "The energy. It's like it's in tune with the Erebus itself." "That's impossible," Lieutenant Nora Hayes said, her hand on her sidearm as she surveyed the chamber. "The ship can't just respond to it like that." The crew stood frozen, watching the artifact with a mix of fascination and fear. The whispers, those strange voices they had heard from the moment they boarded the Erebus, seemed to grow louder. At first, they were soft, almost imperceptible. But now, they reverberated through the walls, echoing in the minds of the crew, tugging at something deep inside them. "Is anyone else hearing that?" Hayes asked, her voice tight with concern. "I hear it," replied Lieutenant Jason Cole, his eyes darting around the room. "It's like it's calling to us." Vega stepped forward, his hand hovering near the artifact. The voices were becoming louder now, swirling in his head like a storm. He could almost make out words, but they were not words he understood. They felt foreign, ancient, unnatural. His pulse quickened as he tried to focus on the task at hand. He had to stay in control. "Focus," Vega ordered, his voice firm. "We don't know what this thing is capable of. We need to disable it now." But as he reached for the artifact, a pulse of energy shot out from it, sending a shockwave through the room. The crew staggered back, thrown off their feet by the force. The whispers intensified, now almost deafening, filling the room with a strange, almost hypnotic chant. "What the hell was that?" Cole shouted as he struggled to regain his balance. Dr. Lin shook her head, trying to clear the dizziness from her mind. It's reacting to us. It's like it knows we're here. It's trying to communicate." Vega gritted his teeth. "We need to shut it down before it does any more damage. Cole, Hayes, get to the control panel and figure out how to stop it. Dr. Lin, stay with me. We need to understand what we're dealing with." The crew split up, moving quickly through the chamber. Vega remained at the platform, staring at the artifact. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. The surface was smooth and metallic, but there were symbols etched into it, symbols that didn't belong to any known civilization. "We need to find a way to block its signal," Dr. Lin said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. She was scanning the artifact with her handheld device, trying to decipher its energy readings. Vega turned to her, his eyes narrowing. What's it doing? Why is it so powerful? I think it's a gateway, Dr. Lin replied, her voice shaky but determined. It's a device that can connect different parts of space-time. It may have been designed to open rifts between different dimensions, or to summon something from them. Vega felt a chill run down his spine. You're saying it could bring something here? Something from another dimension? Dr. Lin nodded slowly. Yes, and from what I can sense, it's already starting to react to the ship. The Erebus might be feeding it. The realization hit Vega like a slap to the face. The Erebus hadn't disappeared because it had been lost. It had been part of a much larger plan. The crew hadn't just been lost. They had been consumed by whatever was on the other side of the rift. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Vega's vision blurred as the voices surged into his mind. He staggered back, gripping the edge of the platform for support. Captain, Dr. Lin called, concern in her voice. Captain, are you all right? Vega snapped out of his trance, shaking his head as if to clear it. We don't have much time. We need to stop this before it's too late. The room was growing colder. The walls of the Erebus seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if the ship itself were alive, reacting to the artifact's power. The crew felt the pressure mounting, the air growing thicker, and the temperature dropping rapidly. Captain, Hayes called from across the room. We've found the control panel, but it's locked. We need your code to access it. Vega rushed over, his mind racing. He knew this was the turning point. If they didn't stop the artifact now, the Erebus, and everything in its path, could be lost. He quickly entered the access code, watching as the panel lit up with strange symbols. The screen flickered, then came to life. All right, Vega said, breathing a sigh of relief. Now we just need to override the system and shut it down. As he worked, the energy in the room seemed to grow even more intense, as if the artifact knew they were close to shutting it off. The whispers turned to screams, and for a moment, Vega wondered if they had made the right choice. Could they really destroy something so powerful? But there was no time to second-guess. He entered the final command, his fingers trembling. The room went completely dark. The room was plunged into darkness. Captain Elias Vega's heart pounded in his chest, his breath shallow as he strained to make out any sign of movement in the shadows. The soft hum of the Erebus had ceased entirely, replaced by an eerie silence that felt unnatural in the vastness of space. Did we do it? Lieutenant Nora Hayes asked, her voice breaking the quiet. Did we stop it? Vega stood still, listening, waiting. The air around them felt heavy, as if it were holding its breath. Then, slowly, the lights flickered back on, but the glow was different, dimmer, colder, as though the very energy of the ship had been drained. The once vibrant glow of the artifact had faded, leaving only an empty, lifeless husk on the platform. Vega took a cautious step forward. I don't think we stopped it, he said, his voice tight with uncertainty. It's not over. We've triggered something. Dr. Marilyn's eyes darted around the room, her face pale with fear. The ship is shifting. It's not just a ship anymore. It's reacting to us in ways that don't make sense. The crew exchanged nervous glances. The Erebus had always been a mystery, but now it seemed to be transforming into something far worse. The walls trembled, as if the ship itself was alive, trying to wake up from some long, dark slumber. We need to leave, Hayes said, her hand tightening around the grip of her weapon. Now. But as she spoke, the ship seemed to respond. The walls around them began to warp and ripple, the once straight lines bending unnaturally. The lights flickered again, now casting long, twisted shadows across the room. The temperature dropped even further, sending a chill through their bones. Then, it happened. A crack formed in the air itself, right in front of the crew. It was like the very fabric of space had torn open. A dark rift appeared, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. It was a tear in reality, a portal to somewhere unknown. Everyone, back. Vega shouted, but his words were barely heard over the loud, unsettling hum that filled the room. The rift grew larger with each passing second, expanding as if it were hungry for something. Anything that dared to come close. "Is that the artifacts doing?" Dr. Lin asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She could hardly believe what she was seeing. The rift was not just a physical tear in the air. It seemed to be drawing energy from the very ship itself. Vega's mind raced. If the artifact had opened this rift, it was far more dangerous than they had thought. It could be a link to something far worse than just an alien civilization. It could be a gateway to an entire new reality, one where the rules of physics and time no longer applied. The rift pulsed again, and with a rush of cold air, something began to emerge from the darkness. "Get ready," Vega barked. "We don't know what's coming through." The crew backed away, their weapons drawn, but no one knew what they were about to face. The rift was growing, and now shapes were beginning to take form within it. Strange, shifting shadows that seemed almost human, but not quite. They moved like smoke, flickering and twisting in the air. Their forms blurred in the dim light, only their outlines clear. What is that?" Cole asked, his voice shaking. The shapes in the rift grew clearer. They were tall and thin, their bodies made of an unsettlingly dark substance that seemed to absorb light. Their faces were featureless, except for two deep, glowing eyes that burned like embers. "Not human," Dr. Lin whispered. "They're not human at all." Vega's pulse quickened. He had no idea what these creatures were, but he knew one thing. They weren't friendly. The rift was not just a tear in space. It was a doorway to something far worse, something ancient and dangerous. "Open fire," Vega ordered. The crew immediately opened fire, but the bullets passed right through the figures as if they weren't even there. The creatures didn't flinch, didn't move. They simply floated, drifting toward them, as though drawn by an unseen force. "This isn't working," Hayes shouted. "They're not affected." Vega's mind raced. There had to be something they could do. He remembered the control panel from earlier, the one they had used to access the ship's systems. It was possible that the Erebus had a failsafe, a way to shut down whatever was allowing the rift to remain open. "Lin, stay here," Vega ordered. "The rest of you, come with me." They turned and ran, not waiting for the creatures to approach any closer. Behind them, the rift pulsed and flickered, as if the creatures were being summoned by its power. They reached the control room, but the door was already half open. It wasn't a mechanical failure. This time, it was different. The ship had opened it of its own accord. "Stay alert," Vega said as he pushed the door fully open. Inside, the room was dark, but the screens were alive with strange symbols, flickering and changing in patterns that didn't make sense. The ship was responding to the rift. It was feeding it. "How do we close it?" Hayes asked urgently. Vega approached the nearest console, his fingers flying over the keys. "There has to be a command to sever the link." The ship shook again, harder this time. The rift had grown even larger, and the creatures were closer. There was no time left. Finally, Vega found the override. His heart raced as he entered the command, praying that it would work. With a sudden, sharp noise, the rift flickered. The creatures screamed in a haunting alien language, their bodies twisting and distorting as they fought against the ship's power. But they couldn't resist. The rift closed, the dark figures disappearing with it. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Erebus began to shake violently. The ship shook harder than before. It was a violent tremor, like a beast thrashing in the depths of the ocean. Captain Elias Vega grabbed hold of the nearest console, trying to steady himself against the violent force that rattled the Erebus's walls. His heart raced as the lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. "Stay focused," Vega shouted to his crew, who were struggling to keep their footing. The ship's power systems were failing, the lights dimming and flickering in rapid bursts. The hum of the Erebus had become an irregular pulse, like the heartbeat of something alive. "What the hell is happening?" Lieutenant Nora Hayes asked, gripping a handrail to steady herself. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "We stopped the rift, right?" Dr. Marilyn's voice shook as she looked at the monitors. "We did, but the ship, it's not responding to our commands. Something else is happening, something we don't understand. The Erebus is waking up." "Waking up," Vega repeated, his brow furrowing. "You mean the ship was in some kind of stasis?" Lynn nodded, her expression grim. "It's more than just a ship. I think it's part of the artifact, or perhaps it's connected to it in some way. When we activated the artifact, we triggered something in the Erebus itself. This ship, it was never just a vessel. It was part of whatever ancient force created that rift." Vega's mind raced. If what Lynn was saying was true, then they were dealing with more than just an alien artifact. The Erebus was a weapon, or perhaps a key, to something far darker and more dangerous. But what? The shaking grew more intense, and the ship's walls groaned under the pressure. The crew exchanged nervous glances, each of them wondering if they had made a terrible mistake. They had thought they were rescuing the Erebus, uncovering its secrets. Now, it felt like they had unleashed something they couldn't control. "We need to shut this ship down. Now." Vega barked, his voice sharp with urgency. "We're trying, Captain," Hayes replied, her hands flying over the control panel. "But the systems are locked. It's like the ship is rejecting our commands." "Could the artifact be controlling it?" Dr. Lynn asked, her eyes scanning the data coming from the ship's systems. "Maybe the artifact has a deeper connection to the Erebus, something we didn't understand. We've seen these strange symbols on the walls. What if they're not just decorative? What if they're commands, programming?" Vega's mind began to piece it together. The Erebus wasn't just a ship, it was a part of something larger, a key or a vessel created to unlock something else. The symbols weren't just alien. They were instructions, a language that had been dormant until now. "Find those symbols," Vega ordered, his voice calm but filled with intensity. "We need to understand what this ship is trying to do." The crew scrambled to search the walls and consoles, looking for any clue they could use to stop the Erebus from completely falling apart. The walls were covered in strange markings, but they were too complex to decipher in such a short time. The symbols flickered with a faint blue light, almost like they were alive, as if they were waiting to be read, to be activated. "These symbols," Dr. Lynn said, pointing at a section of the wall, "they're shifting. It's like they're responding to us, changing depending on where we are standing." "Is there a way to decipher them?" Vega asked urgently, stepping forward. His eyes scanned the wall, trying to make sense of the alien language. The symbols seemed to pulse with energy, as if the ship itself were alive, feeding off the artifact's power. Lynn hesitated, then nodded. "It's possible. But I need time. The system is unstable. The symbols are changing too quickly for me to get a clear reading." The ship groaned again, and the lights flickered once more, casting the room in deep shadows. The strange hum of the Erebus had become a low growl, reverberating through the walls, sending a shiver down their spines. The crew could feel it now. The ship was no longer passive. It was active, alive with purpose. "We don't have much time," Hayes said, her voice tense. "The longer we wait, the worse this gets." Vega turned to Dr. Lynn. "Can you block the symbols from changing? If we can freeze them in place, maybe we can figure out how to shut this ship down." Lynn's eyes narrowed with concentration. "I think so. If I can access the control panel's central systems, I can lock the symbols in place. But I'll need to override the ship's defenses first." "Do it," Vega ordered. "We'll cover you." The crew quickly took positions around the room, weapons at the ready. The pressure was mounting. The Erebus was no longer a passive ship. It was an ancient force, reacting to their presence. Its purpose was becoming clearer, and it was far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Dr. Lynn worked quickly, her fingers flying over the controls. The ship groaned louder, the walls shaking as if protesting her efforts. Suddenly, the symbols on the walls began to glow brighter, almost blindingly so. The low growl from the ship intensified, growing into a deafening roar. "Lynn, hurry!" Vega shouted, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of movement. "I'm almost there." Dr. Lynn responded, her voice tight with concentration. The symbols on the wall pulsed like a living heartbeat, their glow brighter than ever. The energy in the air was so thick it felt like they were standing on the edge of a storm, the air crackling with tension. Then, with a sharp, sudden noise, the symbols froze. The glow from the walls dimmed, and the growl from the Erebus faded. The crew let out a collective breath of relief, though their faces were still filled with uncertainty. "I've locked them in place," Dr. Lynn said, her voice weary but relieved. "Now we just need to figure out what they mean." Vega nodded, but deep down, he knew this was far from over. The Erebus had awoken, and whatever it had been hiding, whatever it was meant to unlock, was still out there, waiting. The Erebus was silent once more, the strange hum now replaced by an unsettling stillness. The symbols on the walls, frozen in place by Dr. Maryland's quick thinking, cast long shadows across the control room. Their faint glow lit up the faces of the crew, who stood in tense silence. They knew something was coming. The calm before the storm was over. Vega wiped the sweat from his brow, his mind racing with questions. The Erebus had awoken, and with it, the terrifying realization that they were not just dealing with a ship, but a key to something far larger, something ancient and powerful. "All right, Lynn," Vega said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "You've frozen the symbols. Now tell us what they mean. Can you translate them?" Dr. Lynn nodded, though her expression was far from confident. "I'm not sure, Captain. The symbols are complex. They seem to represent different forces, different dimensions, but the connections are strange. It's almost like the ship is a map, an ancient one, leading to something beyond this world." Vega frowned. "A map to what?" "I don't know," Lynn admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think it's leading us to whatever the artifact was meant to open. The rift wasn't just a random event. It was a doorway. A doorway to another realm." "Another realm?" Lieutenant Nora Hayes asked, incredulous. "You mean like another world?" Lynn hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, a different dimension. The ship was designed to interact with the artifact, to open these doorways. It's been dormant for centuries, waiting for the right moment to activate. And now, I think we've triggered that moment." The air in the room felt colder, heavier, as the crew processed Lynn's words. They had always known they were part of something bigger than themselves, but to learn that the ship was not just a vessel, it was a gateway to another world, was almost too much to comprehend. "We've been through hell just trying to stay alive on this ship," Cole said, his voice tense. "And now we're supposed to travel to another world. This isn't making sense, Captain." Vega understood his frustration. They had been thrown into one impossible situation after another, and now they were being asked to believe that the Erebus wasn't just lost. It had been part of a much larger, far more dangerous plan. "We don't have a choice," Vega replied firmly. "Whatever's happening, we need to understand it. If we don't, we could be in more danger than we can even imagine. We need to get to the core of this ship, find out what it's hiding. Lynn, can you track the signals the ship is sending?" "I can try," Lynn said, already tapping away at her console. The symbols on the walls flickered as she worked, their glow pulsing in time with the ship's strange energy. "There's something in the core, something big. It's not just a machine. It's alive. And it's connected to the artifact. We need to reach it, Captain." "How do we get there?" Vega asked. "There's a hidden passage, an access point in the lower levels," Lynn explained. "It's buried deep within the ship, sealed off. I'll need to bypass the security systems to open it." "Then let's get moving," Vega said, his tone sharp. "Hayes, Cole, get ready. We're heading to the core." The crew prepared themselves for the journey ahead. They knew the ship better now, but even so, the lower levels were uncharted territory, and the danger was unknown. Every step they took could lead them into another trap, another mystery they couldn't solve. But they had no choice. They had to go deeper. The halls of the Erebus grew darker as they moved, the strange symbols on the walls flashing intermittently. The ship's once vibrant corridors had become cold, lifeless tunnels, and every corner seemed to hide more secrets. As they reached the lower levels, the temperature dropped even further. It was as if the deeper they went, the further they were from the safety of the ship's surface. The air grew thin, and their breath came out in visible puffs. "This place gives me the creeps," Hayes muttered, her hand on her weapon as they moved forward. "Stay focused," Vega replied, his voice low. "We're almost there." Finally, they reached a large door, its surface covered in the same symbols that had been etched into the walls above. Lynn stepped forward, her hands flying over the control panel. "I'm unlocking it now," she said. "It's heavily protected, but I can bypass the code." A moment later, the door slid open with a deep metallic groan. Inside was a vast, dark chamber. The walls were lined with strange, glowing panels that seemed to pulse with an eerie, otherworldly light. In the center of the room stood a massive structure, almost like a giant control center, with cables and wires sprawling out from it in every direction. "This is it," Dr. Lynn said, her voice filled with awe. "This is the heart of the Erebus, the core." Vega felt a shiver run down his spine. The core was unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't just a power source. It was a conduit, a connection to whatever had been waiting on the other side of the rift. The walls of the chamber trembled as the core hummed to life, its glow growing brighter. Then, without warning, the floor beneath their feet cracked open, revealing the deep abyss. "Get back," Vega shouted, but it was too late. From the abyss, something began to rise. It was dark, massive, and shifting, like a living shadow. It was coming for them. The room was plunged into chaos as the floor cracked open, and a massive, dark shape rose from the abyss below. It was like a creature made of shadows, shifting and moving in unnatural ways. Its form was ever-changing, but one thing was clear: it was not something that belonged in their world. Vega's heart raced as the crew stumbled backward, weapons drawn. The shadowy figure before them was unlike anything they had encountered on the Erebus. It was ancient, powerful, and it radiated an unsettling presence that made the air feel thick and heavy. "What is that thing?" Hayes whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Vega replied, his voice tight. "But we need to stop it. Now." The shadow seemed to respond to their presence, its form flickering and rippling like smoke in the wind. The air around them grew colder, and the once steady hum of the Erebus turned into a low, vibrating growl. The core in the center of the room pulsed with energy, and the creature's movements seemed to sync with the ship's strange power. "It's connected to the ship," Dr. Lynn said, her voice filled with awe and fear. "This is the heart of the Erebus. Whatever this thing is, it's been waiting for us." Vega's eyes narrowed as he took in the creature before him. The dark form swirled and twisted, but there was no question. It was alive, and it was connected to the ship. It wasn't just an artifact or a machine. It was a living force, and it was trying to break free. "We can't fight this thing like we would any other enemy," Vega said, his mind racing. "It's not just physical. It's connected to the very essence of this ship." The creature's shape shifted again, its dark tendrils reaching out toward the crew. Vega raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the ship shuddered violently. The walls groaned under pressure, and the ship's systems flickered, almost as if the creature was taking control of the ship's power. "We need to stop it from taking over the ship," Lynn said urgently. "If it gains full control, there's no telling what will happen. It could destroy everything." "Then we need to shut it down," Vega said. "Now." "But how?" I think. Lynn hesitated, looking at the glowing symbols on the walls. I think we can use the ship's own system against it. The artifact and the creature. It's all part of the same force. If we can disrupt the energy flow, we might be able to weaken it. Vega nodded. Hayes, Cole, cover us while Lynn tries to disconnect the power. Got it, Hayes said, her voice firm. She and Cole took up positions, their weapons trained on the creature, but they knew that a simple gunfight wouldn't stop it. They had to trust Lynn. Lynn moved quickly, her fingers flying over the console in the center of the room. The symbols on the walls glowed brighter, shifting and changing as if responding to her actions. The creature let out a low, growling noise, as if aware of what they were trying to do. This isn't easy, Lynn muttered under her breath. The ship's systems are fighting me. It doesn't want to let go. Vega turned to the creature, his eyes locked on its shifting form. The darkness seemed to pull at him, trying to draw him in. He fought the urge to look away, to run. They had come this far. They couldn't give up now. Keep going, Lynn, Vega shouted. We don't have much time. The creature let out a terrible screech, and the ship shook again, harder this time. The lights flickered, and the walls groaned as if the ship itself was in pain. The power was slipping away from them, and they could feel the ship's grip on reality weakening. Lynn's hands flew across the console, her breath coming in short gasps. I almost have it, just a little longer. The creature seemed to be getting more agitated, its shadowy form pulsing with energy. It was as if the ship was fighting against them, protecting the creature. The air in the room felt charged with energy, and Vega could feel the tension building. Now, Lynn shouted. With a final tap on the console, the symbols on the walls flared brightly. The ship groaned, and for a moment, everything went silent. The creature froze, its form wavering as if caught in an invisible force. Then, with a violent roar, the creature collapsed into itself, the dark energy dissipating into the air. The core in the center of the room pulsed one final time before going dark. The Erebus trembled once more, but this time it was different. The shaking wasn't violent. It was a slow, calming tremor, as if the ship was letting out a sigh of relief. Vega lowered his weapon, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He turned to the crew, who were equally exhausted and shaken. They had done it. They had stopped whatever force had been controlling the Erebus. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The danger had passed, but the mystery remained. We need to find out what this ship really is, Vega said, his voice steady but filled with determination. We need to know what it's been hiding. But for now, they had won. The Erebus had been freed from the dark force that had been using it, and the crew had survived. What lay ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They had uncovered a deeper mystery, and it was just the beginning. The Erebus had awoken, but now it was in their hands.